Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the 2024 Cross Labs Workshop After Babel, the quest for universal communication. Today, we are on our third session out of 5 sessions this week, and we are going to have a really exciting discussion with 5 different panelists, all of them who are experts on some aspect of universal communication, but more specifically, perception and sensing, private communication, and all sorts of interesting things like that. So just to recap really quick, so far we have had 2 sessions. The first one, we were talking about the mathematics of communication, kind of like what is the theory of communication and how can we use that knowledge to communicate with other beings like aliens, for example. Then yesterday what we did was we talked about animal communication, cell communication, insect communication, and a lot of really exciting talk about bees and insects and Lana's Cookie the dog. So, like I said, today we're going to continue the discussion about private language, consciousness, perception, and sensing. And that's actually a really good segue after yesterday's conversation because we started talking about that right away. Basically, the conversation went, well, we all have different embodiments and we all have different ways of communicating. So how does our senses and how is the way that our bodies are set up, like how does that relate to the way that we're able to communicate with one another? So without further ado, we are going to do panelist introductions first. Like I said, we have 5 exciting experts who are going to lead the charge on this discussion. So first, they're going to introduce themselves, and they're going to introduce a little bit about their research and what they study. Then after that, we're going to do a discussion with the panelists, where I'm going to ask pretty much just one question, and then they're going to have reactions and go back and forth amongst themselves like that. Then we're going to take a small break, about 10 minutes, and then we're going to have an open discussion with other people who are here with us in the room, and also other people who are with us in the call. So, and if you're watching here live on YouTube, you can always ask questions in the chat, and I'll be your liaison to pass those questions along to the panelists and everybody else who is participating in the discussion. All right. So today's panelists, we have Nao Tsuchiya. We also have Nick Chater, Malika Auvray, Yutaka Makino, and Keisuke Suzuki. And I'll be your moderator, Alyssa Adams. All right, so who's ready to get started? All right, let's go ahead and do some panelist introductions. So first, let's go ahead and start with Nick Chater.
Hello, Alyssa, and hello, everybody. So my name is Nick Chater, and I'm a cognitive scientist working on a range of topics in language and thought. And I'm particularly interested in language and rationality and how those relate to each other. And in the context of this discussion, the thing I'd like to talk about a little bit, just introduce, is an approach to thinking about communication and language that has been developed, especially by my friend and colleague Morten Christensen at Cornell University. And I should say I'm at Warwick University in the UK. So Morten Christensen and I have worked for about 30 years together on thinking about language and communication, and we have a book. This isn't an advert, but if you want to find out more about this, it is in our the book called The Language Game, which came out a couple of years ago. So I'll be talking about the ideas. They're not just my ideas, they're Morten and my joint effort. So the thought here, the idea of the book, The Language Game, is that we can think of language as emerging from local interactions between people. This is actually the language game. The idea goes back to Wittgenstein, the philosopher. And the thought here is that so imagine you have no common language. So you meet someone, you have no common language with them. How are you going to communicate? And indeed, this of course happens a lot historically. And the answer is you can communicate quite well. And one way you can do it is by sort of gestures and noises and all kinds of other very iconic strategies. So you're sort of miming essentially. And if you do that, and we do this in a game of charades, where we convey something like a film or a famous person or a book by doing these various strange actions. And these are unique. They're created in the moment. But nonetheless, they can successfully communicate from one person to another. And they do this by trading on the fact that we have some sort of prior common understanding of the world. So an example of this is an encounter between Captain Cook, who was a British explorer, and a people called the Haush in the Tierra del Fuego at the very south of Latin America. And Cook writes about this incident where it's apparently quite a normal thing. The crew of the ship lands and they look around and think, well, we have to get food and drink somewhere. The Haush appear, or people we think believe to be part of the Haush group, unfortunately now basically driven to extinction by Westerners, I'm afraid. And they have an interaction where, in particular, the crucial thing I want to stress, the example I want to give, is that they're standing on the beach opposite each other, the Western crew members and the Haush, who've had no prior encounters. And the Haush send out two people ahead of the party, so they're vulnerably standing on the beach. Two of Cook's people tentatively walk out. So this is saying something like, we're not going to fight, we're kind of trying to make friends. And the Haush have sticks, and they throw down the sticks. So they take the sticks, wave them about, and throw them down. And this is interpreted as a sign of peace. Now, the fact that that's interpretable across these cultures are completely different. They have no common historical background. The fact that it's clear to both sides, look, we're showing you weapons, we're making ourselves vulnerable, we're throwing our weapons aside. That is a message that we want to be peaceful. And then within a few hours, the people are trading and sitting on ship and trying various Western drinks and thinking they're horrible and so on and so on. So an interaction is broken out, so it's become possible to interact. And this is completely typical. Now, what's going on there is, we would say, the foundations of linguistic communication. It doesn't sound very linguistic, but I think this is where communication of all kinds, including language, comes from. So the idea is that if I have momentary interactions with you, we can use our common understanding of the physical world, the perceptual world. In fact, we have common needs and expectations as people. So we have common understanding of the fact that spears can be weapons, and that weapons, when thrown aside, are not dangerous. And we have a common understanding of vulnerability. This allows us to understand the message that we are, in this case, being peaceful. And that allows us to create a momentary communicative act. But of course, if we want to make that communicative act again, we can do the same thing, but simpler and quicker. If you ever play the game charades, you'll find that's exactly what you do. So the first time you do King Kong, you do some elaborate gorilla impression. But the second time you do King Kong, you do a less elaborate gorilla impression. And it gets less and less elaborate and more stylized and simple. And then, of course, that itself will become used and transferred for all kinds of other things related to gorillas. So it's one moment's a gorilla, then it's a monkey. Now we're just doing it could be superheroes. It can be transferred in all sorts of different ways. You're getting the symbol itself will become more and more stylized and simplified, but the meaning becomes more and more generalized. And that's a general pattern you see in the process called grammaticalization in language. The tendency for the meaning of terms to become ever simpler. Ever more general. The terms become what's called bleached of meaning, but the symbols themselves become simplified. And you see this also in sign language. Of course, sign language are just as complicated as spoken languages, and sign languages are full of symbols that start complicated in historical terms, but become simplified and simplified. And of course, then there's the question of how do you sequence these together. So if you want to create a complicated message, you have to start giving messages in sequence. And of course, then gradually those sequences become standardized and become conventions rather than momentary. So there's this general, I think, so that our thought is that the driver for the creation of systems of communication, like language, is this ability to create momentary conventions. A convention in the very moment where you throw down the sticks, and we can see what that means. But then when we can do that, we can gradually, by reuse and entrenchment, those conventions become simplified and simplified, never more simplified, and they can then become chained together, and the meanings become more and more abstract. So we start to be able to talk about abstract things which are not visible to us. We talk about future tenses and past tenses and all sorts of things like this. And the process by which that occurs are quite well studied by linguists looking at historical linguistics and the way concrete words about specific things start to become more abstracted in their meaning. So that's the story, and then the very, very sketchy story about the cultural evolution of a linguistic system of communication. It starts momentary, starts as an improvisation, but eventually turns into a system. Just 2 points I want to make about that system. The first thing is the improvisation never stops. the systematization of communication is always very partial. So I think we tend to think, particularly if we have a background in logic and computer science, that languages become completely well-defined. They have a well-defined syntax like a programming language, and they have a well-defined meaning. So each term has a well-defined meaning like a programming language. But that's totally wrong. The words we use and the orders and the patterns that we use with them are continually evolving and changing, and they're also continually being twisted and changed in the moment. So when we're actually talking to a person in a concrete situation, we're playing that improvisational game, but we've just got more historical clues. We've got more to draw on. So I think the idea that human languages are anything like mathematical systems or computer programming languages is quite wrong. They're always messy, full of exceptions, and we continually spontaneously improvising to make sense of each other. So the idea that, for example, each word has a standardized meaning is a total fiction. So that's the one point. That the improvisation never stops. The language is always messy and changing, and it's always for its interpretation depending on our common understanding of the world and our common perception and bodies and objectives and so on. But the other thing is that I think this has real implications for the difference between external systems of communication and, quote, private languages. So Wittgenstein, the person from whom the language game idea comes, he sees the primal source of communication as these momentary interactions between one person and another, and we're just borrowing that. But he would also say, well, actually, the idea of a private language, from at least in a sense, doesn't really work in the sense that the kind of language we speak is inherently created as a social construct, and it is also inherently unstable and highly variable. So it's going to be a very different kind of thing from an internal coding language that the brain is going to use, for example, to transmit information from the senses, and also to transmit information to the motor system. So the idea that there are internal modes of coding information built into us, but these are going to work in a very different way from this ad hoc system of improvisations that is human language. So I want to draw a divide between these public languages and internal systems of representations. And whether we want to call those languages or not, I'm not entirely sure. But at least I think there's a really deep, that was Wittgenstein's key point really, a really deep division between this momentary creation of social conventions and the problem of internally representing information in the nervous system. But I'll stop there.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Can't wait to dive into many of these questions a bit later. So let's go to Yutaka Makino.
Hi, I wasn't prepared after Nick's great talk. I'll try to do something. My name is Yutaka Makino, and I'm a composer, artist. I'm also an associate professor at the Kyushu University, which is based in Fukuoka, Japan. I've been working on different type of format, like computer music compositions to installations to performances. But all my work is based on collaborations and researches together with different type of researchers. Actually, the one of them is here, Keisuke, is my close collaborator. And actually, we're working on the kind of auditory hallucination this moment, which is actually part of the research group Nao Tsuchiya is organizing in the qualia structure. So I'm quite happy to be here to talk to you guys at once. I started off my career as a composer, the making of computer music compositions, which is kind of providing the type of sonic structure to the audience. But I'm slowly interested in is more about the receiver side of the composition, how to modify the auditory perception of the audience. Thereon, I started collaborating with different researchers, including Stefan Golazawa from Ludwig Maximilian University, Shimojo at the Caltech, all the different type of scientists who actually can have a discourse in a middle ground of how we approach experience, how to kind of transform experiences. Those are the scientists I've been talking, which is now my close collaborator is Keisuke. We try to understand how we distinguish actually hallucinations reality through this auditory hallucination research. So my work in general approach is about mostly making experience as an artwork. I don't really produce object Noah paintings. My work lies in kind of type of experiences in the different type of situations I create with different building blocks coming from my collaborator, especially the psychophysics and neuroscience and consciousness science. So this is my approach to create artworks and the compositions. That's the kind of my basic background, and this is kind of short, but that's my introduction to my work and myself.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Next, we're going to Malika Auvray.
Hello. I made a little slide. I don't know if it's useful, and I sent it to you by email. Because you asked.
You should be able to share it if you'd like. Maybe.
I didn't find, but how to do it?
Circle back.
Shall we circle back?
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to load it and then we'll circle back. So let's go to Nao Tsuchiya.
Okay. I also made some slide, and I think I tested it, so it should work this time.
Yes.
How's it?
Yep, looks great.
Yeah, so, and I do this. Is it still visible?
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me to this nice symposium setting on Zoom. And I'm mainly interested in consciousness and perception among this private language and sensing. And I'll give a little bit of introduction on myself. So I'm ultimately interested in the dissolving the hard problem of consciousness, the relationship between the consciousness and the matter. And for towards that kind of goal, I've been doing several things. And one of the things also, Yutaka mentioned was this 5-year project supported by Japanese government, the Korea Structure Project. And this super interdisciplinary research program tries to arrive at novel ways to understand the other's mind, and that I think will be consistent with this, after Babel symposium. And in particular, we are planning to also proposing to do this through the structural perspective of the Korea, and which is, I think, relatively novel in this field of the consciousness research. And this is a depiction of one of the key concepts we use, so-called Yoneda lemma. And that's probably something to do also with what Nick also mentioned, as how to characterize or how to understand the internal things from the external relationship or externally visible behaviors. Now, what the Yoneda lemma in category theory says is that everything you can know about the internal thing can be understood already if you have all the information about its external relationship. I don't go into the detail of these things, but I think this concept or philosophy of Yoneda lemma is a very useful thing and the interesting thing about thinking about consciousness or language or communication in general. And this Korea structure paradigm is quite interdisciplinary, as I said, from going from mathematics to phenomenology, philosophy, and neuroimaging, and also robotics, symbol emergence, and also development. And here you see, Olaf's partner Yuko is here as a phenomenology researcher. And also, as also Yutaka said, Keisuke, and also some of the familiar faces here, Takashi and also Mizuki, has joined our research as a part of this publicly offered research this year. And if you're watching this YouTube sometime, maybe you might want to applying for this thing, which is open next year in July. And also, we are doing summer school for this Korea structure projects. And one of the inspiration for this summer school is, I think I saw Pete's face over there, but I and Ryota and Kenji Doya and Pete organized a summer school for consciousness years ago. And there we met Yuko and Olaf, and also Nicholas. Also, I think Nicholas will join to this session as well. So that's the kind of thing that we want to also extend in this project. And now, moving on to my own laboratory's approach is to focus on what are the internal shapes or boundaries of consciousness. It's a structure approach, and also the processes. I'm interested in the relationship between consciousness or qualia and attention memory reports. And in this process, I encountered Nick's book published 8 years ago, The Mind is Flat. And there I have several, things to discuss. I wanted to discuss with you maybe in this symposium, but if the topic goes into other direction, maybe we can talk about it later.
Sounds good to me.
Offline. Oh, great. Yeah. So my point is that attention and consciousness are distinct brain processes, and it can be dissociated and so on. And also empirical tests. I'm interested in how to test these theories of consciousness empirically. And one of the focus was to make this integrated information theory testable, and that's something we published. And now that sort of Nick also started already showing interest for our approach on this consciousness and so on. I think my first sort of the foundational kind of approach is to take our phenomenology seriously as a starting point. And that means that it's not, we are not trying to explain consciousness or phenomena from the behavior, observable behavior, or rationality, or logic, and so on, but start or accept our phenomenology first, and then try to see whether this makes sense in terms of other, known physics or, mathematical phenomenology. And for example, many people think that colors in the periphery must be illusory because this cone density in the periphery is very low. But if that's true, then is there something that we can do in terms of experiment? And we published some registered report study before knowing this result. For example, can we compare the similarity of the briefly shown colors in the very, very periphery? Without going into the result, I also do something, some other kind of experiments. For example, Nick's book, I don't know whether you have changed your mind after that, but Daniel Dennett and other people also say that we feel like we are seeing several things at the same time, or rich experience at each moment, but in fact we are seeing only one thing at a time. But is it actually true? And to test that, we can also do various kind of experiments. So I didn't expect that we can't use that chat box. So this experiment probably doesn't work, maybe. But if you can shout what you see in the brief moment, briefly showing stimulus next, then maybe it works. So I'm going to show some unexpected natural scene. I think your task is to shout what you see. Does it make sense? Okay. Okay. 3, 2, 1, 0. What did you see?
Eiffel Tower.
Eiffel Tower in a park.
Anything else?
Trees.
Trees, grass,
Yeah, sky.
maybe a cloud, but maybe.
Excellent. So this is, what you said is pretty much replicated in the other people, and this is the more controlled kind of duration experiment. But the Eiffel Tower is quite, dominant kind of a report over there. And grass and Paris trees, blah blah blah. Many things can be reported per participant. Each of the row is individual subject, and this is without warning, without training, and we can see many things apparently. So how does it actually, consistent with some of the theories that other theories of the consciousness propose? And this is the kind of thing that I wanted to discuss with you. And yeah, maybe I'll just stop here.
Great. Wow, thank you so much. I definitely can't wait to dig down into all those topics and questions. It's a lot to unpack then. Okay, it's going to be a great discussion. Okay, so Malika, I have your slide. Let me share it here. Okay, here we go. And then let me make sure it's full screen here. Oh, no.
No, but it's okay.
Okay, here we go. Good.
So thanks a lot also for inviting me. So I'm a cognitive scientist, and I work at CNRS Paris on topics related to multisensory perception and sensory substitution. So I worked on many types of translations, visual to tactile, visual to auditory, and I also worked on converting social touch into sound. And this is done at the applied level, and also to ask theoretical questions, such as the taxonomy of our senses and how technology modifies our perception of the world. And I just here put some thoughts on the topic. So I thought that one of the requirements to have, as you said, a science fiction universal translator allowing conversations across different spaces is that these spaces have the minimal prerequisite to understand each other. And in other words, there is a need for these spaces to share parts of the same world. And what I want to illustrate here is that as species, we live in different perceptual worlds, and we have different so-called umwelts. And these different perceptual worlds add constraints on what we can communicate. So I took here the example of the visible light, which illustrates that our perceptual reality corresponds to a very, very thin slice of the real. And in fact, we perceive an extremely small proportion of the electromagnetic spectrum. And we see the visible light because we have specialized receptors to perceive at this wavelength. And meanwhile, we remain unaware of many other waves that are out there. For instance, we remain unaware of radio waves or gamma rays because we do not have the correct photoreceptors to do so. And other species have access to other portions of reality. So for instance, snakes have receptors to detect infrared signals, or honeybees have receptors to detect ultraviolet light. And the same occurs in other sensory modalities. So for example, the smelling system of dogs allows them to perceive more information than us. They can know, for example, that a human was here hours ago. So in principle, if we were to have the appropriate receptors, we could have access to far more information in the visual modality and in other sensory modalities. And we could even have access to non-sensory information. And this is precisely the aim of sensory substitution or sensory augmentation, which is to provide information through an atypical sensory channel. And I've put two illustrations here, but many devices exist. So here I've put the example of the Sense of the North, or a tactile vest that allows reading, for instance, Twitter posts to touch. And in my lab, as I just said, I worked on other devices allowing to perceive visual information through touch or sounds, or tactile information through audition. And what these considerations open is first that we have to take into account the constraints of our perceptual systems to know the type of information we can communicate. Second, this suggests that our world can be extended thanks to technology so as to be closer to other species' perceptual world. In short, some information can be better communicated in a shared world. And the third one is more to really open the discussion. So it is likely that we won't be able to understand the information the bees transmit based on ultraviolet light, but this may go further and extend even to shared information, because as our perceptual systems, as any tool that we can use, shape our cognition. We might have cognitive processes that are too different to properly understand each other. So the question would be, would that improve if we have more habituation, thanks to technology, to others' unveiled, to a shared perceptual world, in order to better understand how this would transform our cognition? So these were just outside there, open for discussion.
Incredible. I have a secret wish to become a cyborg one day, and this gives me lots of hope. Very cool. Amazing. Okay, so we'll go to Keisuke Suzuki for our last introduction, and then we'll do reactions after that. All right, Keisuke.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Keisuke Suzuki. Now I become associate professor in Center for, what's the name? Center for Human Nature, Artificial Intelligence, and Neuroscience at Hokkaido University. And I have also the slide. So, but maybe the first, maybe the easiest way to introduce myself is I was working on some. Maybe I can show some video here. So one of my recent study is simulating the visual hallucination, especially kind of psychedelic perception. So this is, I think it was a bit viral at some point. So this is just the video originally captured in Sussex University campus, but we processed the video image through the kind of neural network to basically let neural network to hallucinate their world. You can see a lot of dog face and stuff like that. But the point is, it's not designed by human or created by human. It's all just ask AI to like visualize what they see the world. So that's one of the my recent work. And so I'm really recently interested in what is difference between our normal perception and this kind of atypical, something. It's not very, I would say, not happening to everyone, but only happen to certain people. But again, it's really difficult to capture what is the phenomenology of them. So this is one of the idea. Maybe we can make like computational model to mimic people's perceptual experience, to compare directly there with their subjective experience. So that's one of our approach recently started. And this is my like a background. I actually originally from physics, but my master and the PhD was about more like AI, artificial life. So that's why I met actually Malika last summer. We invited her into our artificial life conference. And after that, I did some postdoc in Sussex University, led by Anil. This is, I think, one of the few center focused on consciousness in scientific way. And then as Nao and Yutaka said, we just recently started a new project on inner speech. This is actually, to me, it's kind of gradual, I'll say. It's progressing from the visual hallucination to more like auditory hallucination, because, it's kind of similar stuff. Like people have their perception from perception of external world, but also we have things in our head. So I want to just, make a connection between how some people actually see the stuff in your mind externally. And that's maybe, it's common between visual or auditorial. And for example, this is like, I like this, this is just Japanese comics, but sometimes we have this kind of text outside of the speech. So, I mean, for me, it's kind of obvious. This is like a monologue. People speak inside your brain, inside your mind. But we found some people cannot understand what this is. Is it narration? Like sometimes when you see the movie, there's someone talking from the sky or something. So it's kind of interesting. Some people don't really have inner speech, or they might have totally different type of inner speech. So that's this project is about. So people have different type of inner speech. I think the most common stuff is like verbal, of course, like people are speaking inside by your own voice. But some people actually only have like written language or even visual representation, and it's actually lot of study. I mean, I think the study of inner speech is back to like maybe the next one, like a Piaget or Vygotsky. They actually all talk about how to what is inner speech compared to contrast to the external normal language. So they say, like a Piaget said, or maybe we have the inner speech first and then it's developed into the external speech. Or Vygotsky actually said the opposite. So maybe social language, external language comes first, and then it's internalized at some point to have their own voice. But we also found these, the inner speech, study of the inner speech is really focused on linguistics. So, they all talk about, inner speech as our language, inner language. But we also found, some people, as I said, they don't really have linguistic-based inner speech. They just, it's more like a thought process. But some people actually have a thing with just an image, or sometimes they're just using the flowchart. So that's like one starting point to do. So actually, one of our collaborator, Hideyuki Takahashi from ATR, now it's Osaka University, he already did some really interesting survey using Twitter. Now it's called X. He basically showed a lot of video clip which describe different type of different way of thinking in a certain situation, like when they what your thought like when you think about, like, I want to buy a house, or I want to buy a car, or when you lost your wallet, what your inner thought. And it's interesting, a lot of people never thought about that. They just naturally use their thought process. But until they actually got asked how it's like, they don't really realize that. So I think this is kind of similar to the synesthesia or aphantasia that's getting recently really popular research topic, but they normally don't really, it's just so internal, so they don't really compare with what is like with other people. So this is really interesting research topic, because maybe, as Nick said, it's language. Natural language is so easy to communicate with each other, but we don't need to share exact same representation. So maybe that's why it's kind of hidden. So that's our kind of research topic. So this is a kind of preliminary result, but we already found there's many different type of inner speech or inner thought process. Like some people have spoken language, some people has written language, but sometimes it's overlapped. People having this is not exclusive rating, so people can choose many different type of inner thought. So some people choose spoken language as an inner speech. They also tend to choose a written language as well. But the visual and spoken language kind of not overlap each other. So this kind of approach, it's still like a survey level, but we are doing this kind of stuff. And then, like, I think this kind of study is, this is more like the collaboration with Yutaka. But I'm really interested also, like, auditorial hallucination in schizophrenic patient. And I think it's, I said in the beginning, it's maybe similar mechanism, but sometimes people say the schizophrenic hallucination is more like, what's called? It's not actual hallucination. It's not actual perception. They just treat their own inner voice as an external voice. So the idea is maybe we can interfere with our inner thought using external generated voice. So this is one of the example. Actually, Yutaka told me this video game called Hellblade's Senua's Sacrifice. I don't know if anyone played this game, but this is video game, and it's, I think this is like a first shooter, or like a maybe more medieval action game. But the meanwhile you're playing a game, you actually hear a lot of voice, which kind of interfere in your decision-making process. So I haven't yet played this one, but Yutaka said, at some point especially when you're really into playing the game, sometimes you don't really, it's really confusing. Is it actually my thought or is it actually someone's voice? I think that's something we want to create as a artwork style of stuff. So yes, that's still, we haven't yet started, but this is our new project and really exciting to do this. Okay, thank you. That's end my slide.
Oh, wow, that's absolutely fantastic. And I wonder what such an artwork would look like. Hopefully it's not as scary as the game. Okay, so I think we're going to do one round of reactions because a lot of really amazing points and ideas and points for discussion were introduced. So I'm thinking that maybe we can do one round of reactions and then we'll take a 10-minute break and then do the open discussion after that. So let's go in the same order that we started in, and that way everybody can just have an open reaction to whatever points stick out to you the most. So let's start with you, Nick.
Thanks, Alyssa. Yes, I mean, fascinating work from everybody. So if just a few tiny things pick up from me. So Nao mentioned the point about can we perceive multiple things at once? And there, I think I'd hold on to the fact that the process, something like sensory processing, is a kind of cascade-like process which takes some time. So I mean, in old-fashioned studies from the sort of 70s, you'd have a flash of an image, and then the idea would be that, and then there'd be some masking, and you'd see that some early parts of the image could be processed quite quickly. But if you don't have any masking, of course, then the flow of information is still going through the system for quite a while. So you've got quite a lot of time to jump from paying attention to one part of the image to another. A bit like an after image. It's clearly not an after image, but just in the same way, if you have a flash and you have an after image on your retina, you can inspect that after the flash is gone, even if it's very brief. The same is true there. So given that the process of the flow of information through the system is quite slow, then the fact that you can see an image, as we did with the very nice Eiffel Tower, we can pick out various things, not much, but various things, even though it's a brief image. I think doesn't necessarily tell us we're seeing those at the same time. So I think that's an open and very interesting question, and I'm not dogmatic about this. I really like the idea, just because it's simple, that we can only pay attention to one thing at once. And we know, for example, that people with certain disorders such as simultagnosia appear to have that phenomenology, so that they're taking their phenomenology seriously. They sort of say, I see a fork, oh, I see a knife, I see a hand, but they don't seem to see several things at once. They might see a whole person, but they don't see multiple objects in a way that we think we do. My assumption is that the reason we think we do is that we're able to fluently jump from object to object quite quickly, and so in fact so quickly that we don't realize we're doing it. And similarly with reading, so we look at a sheet of paper with words on it and we think, oh, I see loads of words here, but actually if you look more closely, it appears that we only really can read the word that, or even see really the word roughly that we're looking at any given moment. But I think that's all very, very interesting, and then lots and lots of open questions. We don't collectively know the answers there. I think one thing I wanted to say a little bit about was the question of the relationship between phenomenology and external languages. So as you can probably guess from what I said at the beginning, I'm coming from a Vygotskian perspective. I'm not that that's my tradition at all, but if we had to make a Piaget-Vygotsky contrast, I'm coming from the Vygotsky perspective very much. So I tend to think of the perception of internal speech as very much as if I'm just speaking aloud, but just not bothering to say the word. So it's a bit like internal imagery, but not, as it were, bothering to draw with my hand or something. So I'd see that as not actually giving us a direct insight into what we're thinking. I mean, for example, as I speak, you might say, well, it's all very well, these words, what are you thinking? Well, the answer is I have no idea. I mean, I have no idea what my brain's up to. My brain is doing lots of complicated things. All I can generate is these words, and you're in just as good a position as I am to work out what those mean. So I don't think of language as giving us a direct route into the mind at all, actually. So I don't think that internal phenomenology and our particularly languages are actually telling us about the internal states of our brain in any direct way. So the systems of internal representation of information in the sensory system and the brain in general, I would see as completely distinct, and so not related to these very late, highly improvised, highly unstable cultural improvisations that we've managed to collectively embody. So I'd see that as a bit like the relationship between the principles that underlie our understanding of the physical world and actual physics. So actual physics in physics books created by physicists. I mean, that's, the relationship. One can't say, well, all of that knowledge must somehow, it's in your brain. I would want to say that's not the case. And similarly, external languages, it's kind of a mistake to think those external languages, they must be somehow, there must be some parallel for those inside the head. And I think in some ways, like large language models are a kind of great example of how that can work. So large language models produce and well, they generate and sort of understand in a shallow way language quite well. But if you ask yourself, and how do they represent information? Well, we have no idea at all, essentially. But they certainly aren't doing it in a natural language. So the ability. But large language models can also hallucinate things and generate, and they've obviously similar models. Deep learning models can generate images. But again, you wouldn't want to see those are the outputs of the system. Those images of those bits of language are the outputs of the system. They're not telling you what's going on inside the system. So my starting point is we have essentially no insight at all into the workings of our minds. I mean, literally none. I don't think the brain gives us any sensory. I don't think we have any interoception into the brain at all. We have an understanding of our senses, and we have the ability to generate motor commands. We have absolutely no insight into our minds. So when I'm speaking, I can hear my own words just as you can hear them, and but I can't. That doesn't give me any. I have no special insight into what I'm meaning and the thoughts I'm having that is over and above what insights you have. So I'm really kind of want to push against, or at least throw out the possibility that we should keep the question of internal representation of information and external communication of information between people as very, very different things. And then the final thought, I think this question of the question of hallucination and understanding what parts of the sensory world are generated by one's own imagistic system and by reality is a really, really deep and interesting question, and very, very interesting, and it's a wonderfully interesting area for art, but obviously deeply interesting for understanding human experience and particularly disorders. And I suppose a starting point for this, which I think is common probably to all of us, is to think that it's a hard problem to work out where your phenomenology is coming from. It doesn't come labeled saying I'm phenomenology generated by imagistic processes, or I'm phenomenology generated by the external world. And the process of generating in both cases is very similar. So again, I suppose this would be illustrated by the strange dogs on the Sussex campus, which I really, really like. I mean, in reality, the process of making sense of the world is a very generative process. So you're continually trying to generate a model, a hypothesis about what the world contains, and that process will often be wrong. So there's a lot of your prior expectations in there, and there's some sensory data in there, and they're kind of mixed together. And it's not that there's one process for generating images and another process for perceiving the world, and you can't get them mixed up. There's really one process which is trying to make sense of, or to generate kind of coherent explanations of what you're seeing or hearing, and that you don't. And some of the time, most of the work is being done by your internal expectations, and some of the time most of the clues are coming from outside, but that again, you have no insight into where that's coming from. So it's quite a hard problem, I think, to work out, to keep separate voices generated by yourself and voices generated by the external environment. And of course, usually we have loads and loads of sensory cues. So normally, if I hear echoes in the room, I think, well, those echoes are clearly from the room, aren't they? Because that's an external thing. Or but that's, I still have to. It's a sensory problem detecting the difference between the the quality, the phenomenological quality of externally generated sounds versus internally imagined sounds. And if we interfere with that, then I will struggle to know the difference. Of course, that, you know, so I think that's really, really interesting. And I haven't thought about this at all, but it's a really interesting question how we can interfere with this such that people may lose track of the clues or break down the clues that tell them what's generated by themselves and what's generated by the external world. But as I say, often it's going to be a mix, and it's always a mixture. And it's, yes, it's been a very interesting question to explore artistically and in science as well. So I just, yeah, a great set of talk. The other thing, very briefly, on aliens. Of course, large language models are aliens, aren't they? In a sense. I mean, they don't really inhabit the world at all. They don't have bodies that have senses. But of course, we can attach them to banks of images. So we are facing this question of, and we can create many other artificial systems which will have very different experiences of the reality to us, either because they have completely different senses, or because they have seeing the same world but with a very, very different machinery. So seeing the world through a camera is really not like seeing it through an eye, is it? And yeah, that's a very, very it's a very, I think, a very live question actually. How easy or hard it's going to be to communicate with artificial systems, whose sensory machinery is, even though it might seem familiar, if they have a camera, you might think, well, that's the same sensory machinery as we have, but it really isn't. Cameras are really nothing like the human visual system. So I think it's a very, very, very live question for the next decade. But yeah, all fascinating, very, very interesting. Thank you very much to everybody for your stimulating thoughts.
Yutaka, your reactions. Perhaps he froze for a second.
I think you're muted.
Am I muted? No, is he muted?
Yutaka is muted.
Yes, he's muted.
I'm muted. I'm just saying that I did the wrong way to present myself, because I didn't show any composition of artwork and claiming I'm an artist. So, in response to Nick's comment, I'd like to share one thing, if it's possible. I'm not sure technically possible, but how can I share the audio file?
Oh, I don't know about audio.
You can just share the player, music player. When you try to share the screen, you can choose a specific application or window.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe you can try to do that after the break.
Okay, maybe I'll do that. So can you guys wait my comment? So it kind of doesn't work without this work, I think. So
yeah, I think so. Yeah. So maybe so now.
Well, Malika first, I guess.
Oh, Malika first. Yeah, I think she was supposed to go first, and then now. So Malika.
So just a small thanks. I found it very interesting, the comments of Keisuke Suzuki on the science of inner speech, and I really wondered what could be the consequences of having an inner speech or not, or to different degrees. What constraints or consequences will it have on our cognition, and hence on the content and structure of what we can communicate? So I was aware that there were some work, but I'm not aware of works that would investigate the constraints it puts on our cognitive system, and I would be extremely interested on that, because it would be extremely related on the topic. And I also wanted to build on what was said on change blindness, and I sort of agree with Nick Chatter that for me, the fact that you can report many things at the same time doesn't mean that you perceive all of this simultaneously, but again, as a proof that perception is temporally extended and happens over time. And again, looking back to my field, it's something that we can see in sensory substitution as well. For example, if we give devices that convert visual images into touch, then this is done with most of the time a low resolution. So even with 100 points of resolution, you see shades of gray, and you think, okay, if I show you the image, you think I'm never going to be able to perceive anything. And then you perceive, because you take several points of view on the same object, and then over time, this is integrated into an object. So I want to question this, and I also thought, related to the project, the ability to integrate more and more complex information over time might also be a constraint on what we can communicate. And all the rest was fascinating, but I'm afraid I do not have specific questions or comments, so I'm happy to leave the floor.
Yutaka, if you share a tab and then turn on the audio share, it will work. But you're on mute.
So what should I do?
So if you have your video in a tab, you can share your tab when you press the Present Now button on the bottom, and then you can share a tab.
I will try to share. Might not have a screen recording permission to. I see. I might have a problem. So
you'll have to restart the browser, I think, actually. So we'll do it after the break.
Yeah, exactly. That's my problem, I think.
Okay.
I'll do it later.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. But did you want to share any other thoughts? Any other reactions?
And now hasn't had a chance to react.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so we'll go to Nao.
Okay, so thank you for the comment from Nick and also Malika about first of all that the demonstration that I made was intentionally, really like provocative to inside some kind of comments like yours, of course, and of course in the real published work we did the masking, and also the duration of the stimulus was also 60 milliseconds or something like that. So there's no way you can make an eye movement. And still, the reports were like you saw in the Eiffel Tower and the park and things like that. And we also use 400 different kind of natural scenes, so you can't really imagine or prepare anything to do that. And the reason why I kind of brought that thing, and also those are also all masked and so on. So we are making some kind of progress on this end to dissociate attention and consciousness, and several things that becomes clear over the last 10 years or so of this research is that many of the claim, including some of the stuff that Nick wrote about the reading and also gaze contingent display and things like that, were made in the era where people didn't actually take the phenomenology either very seriously, or the type of the report or technology to analyze all these reports were very limited. I think this is quite an agreeable kind of point. So the beginning of the phenomenological studies tend to be either totally relying on the subjective reports, and then reports were kind of subjectively remembered by the researchers and then transcribed and then subsequently edited a little bit and then produced as a case report or some kind of summary, right? So here there's already I would say 3 steps of the summarization or editing or distortion of the phenomenology. Phenomenology to language is already huge distortion, right? And then after the language, I try to say something, but then you understand it in different way. That's a distortion. And then after you report, after you see or hear the report, and then you try to also edit it to the extent that other people can understand. That's also another, distortion. And each of the distortion usually doesn't expand. Usually, cuts the information, right? So as a result, I would say that most of the stuff that has been done in terms of language is quite a biased towards a reduction and poor characterization of phenomenology. And on the other hand, highly solid behaviorist kind of tradition doesn't allow you to do anything like a language report. And there, what you do is either button press, right? Button press for yes or no, or A or B. And that's also pretty limited. So, over the last 10 years or so, many people started to realize this kind of realization, limitation, and they moved on to more continuous scale of the confidence rating or multidimensional kind of response. And that's another thing. But even that is still limited. I would say that, limitation imposed by the experimenters, that's really significant. So what I mean by that is that, for example, when I show this Eiffel Tower image, right, then it's still the case that people, as an experimenter, sets what would be the answer. Like, Eiffel Tower is there objectively. Therefore, if you don't say Eiffel Tower, then you are wrong. But that's ridiculous to me, because some people may see it as a Tokyo Tower. I don't know, for the Japanese people who never had any idea about Paris, may just report it as a Tokyo Tower, literally. But that should be probably correct in terms of consciousness. And we did, in fact, something similar using our another experiment. I can quickly show this another demo of the same kind. And do you see this image?
Mhm.
So yeah, if I ask you to report what you see very briefly about this image, and then with mask appropriately, then what would you say in this case?
Sydney Opera House?
If you can shout. Sydney Opera.
Sydney.
Many people do that. And in fact, if you do that in Australia, 100% people would say that. But it is actually high tempo. And do you say that this is a wrong or incorrect representation, inveridical? I don't think so. So this also, strongly kind of resonate of the interest and also technology that we need to develop in studying the inner speech, for example, right? Or synesthesia or hallucination. Because there, we need to start from phenomenology. You can't say that no, because many people will think about this kind of inner speech in terms of words. If you imagine inner words in terms of action or visual image, that's wrong. That you can't say that. That's what I mean by taking phenomenology seriously. And also, this is the kind of the experiment that is very difficult to do, and especially it was impossible to do in the past. But now, because of the online experiments, possibly we can do this kind of thing over the thousands of 10,000 experiments, and then potentially, look at how much of the intersubjective agreement there is actually. And many things, including, this is not only Nick, but, many writings like, Dennett or other people's, popular books especially, we make a very strong points about the phenomenology or attention or memory. But many of the claim is never tested empirically. And it's mostly based on philosophers' ideas or individual own, kind of experience or style of the cognition. So this is the kind of thing I think would need to be revised and also should be developed in the future, and that will lead us to the realization that many things, not only just objects, but the various combination of things can be perceived simultaneously, depending on the combination or property of the objects, and sometimes these one thing can take a long time and so on. And also there may be some huge inter-individual difference and so on. And that's it.
Very insightful. Keisuke, your reaction.
Sure. So I totally agree with Nao's point, and that's one of the reasons I really want to make, phenomenology using machine learning or some computational model, because we can actually parameterize. And I think the idea here is, we haven't yet tried this way, but if we can like create something like with different parameter, we can just adjust, or just how to say, actually different parameter to changing the experience, and ask people to choose or stop or whatever. They can control which is most similar to what they actually see or something. So that in that way we can actually model phenomenology directly with the computational model or something. That's what I maybe want to do for this visual hallucination modeling. The other stuff, like I like this sensory substitution idea for a really long time, and I was thinking maybe I sometimes feel like these kind of psychophysics or visual consciousness studies really limited on vision, and like maybe we can use sensory substitution to, how to say, investigate how universal some of the phenomenology or whatever, like this kind of GIS perception is it only happening for visual perception, or like I remember like one of the, I think someone from Sussex, Jamie Ward, he also working on a sensory substitution. I remember he said like they found after effect happened, even the sensory substituted perception. So they actually discuss after image is not specific for the vision, but it could be any other modality. But you need to maybe have some kind of similar information with the vision or whatever. But like maybe something combined with the sensory substitution with like Nao's approach is something really interesting for the future. That's my comment.
Great. Yeah, that was an awesome set of reactions. So we've been chatting for almost, I guess, like over an hour now. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. So we're going to put a pause on the YouTube live. And then we're going to come back and open up the discussion among the panelists, but also for people who are in the room at Cross Labs HQ, and then also people who are on the call as well. Okay, so we'll be back in 5 minutes, and that's at 3:20 Japan time. See you soon. All right, welcome back. So we are going to go ahead and open up the discussion. But first, we're going to start with Yutaka because he has this audio and video to share with everyone. So yes, he has it loaded. So go ahead, Yutaka.
Hi, I'm so sorry for not being able to do so before. I just wanted to share this one first in order to respond to the comment.
So then the director deliberately demonstrated observed in the south. So I am not that keep the rest of them distance. That are cousin Well, look at our seeing you clear mass to see you as a third, because they have on your feet. So I don't worry. Soon I press someone at the hole or full immerster. The dad has rather a tip to strip into the stop. It's because they have to start for down near head pundy. See, I'm listen. Where the lad out around, playing with it with the longer. But that's your hammer. Working at us and then the quail need to actionless. So there are wrestler was that bird put your face in the nester. Courts are easy that glide a lot in nester. Fiddle the
So in response to Nick's observation and Nao's phenomenological approach, this audio file wants to, with this audio file wants to make a situation where the one that listened to this file continue to wonder what the language they've been spoken in this file. That's kind of my work is about this duration of this wonder and unsettlement. So this constantly observing the language and the kind of situation of the voice, how they've been spoken this language. It's kind of, this is all generated by the machine learning. And first we train it in English, and then so this program can forcefully listen to Japanese and then try to pronounce with English pronunciation. So this, you have this kind of language only phonetics, but kind of creating a situation that quite unsettling and quite unnerving to kind of listen to. So that is a kind of the compositions and the audio works I do, kind of prolong the duration of wonder and the kind of phenomenological observation to the situation that you're listening in and what are you listening to. So this is my kind of response to the comments you guys had. Yeah, kind of short, but this is my comment to the comments. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. All right, anybody can just jump right in. Either you can unmute yourself or you can also use the raise hand button in Google Meet. Also, for people here in person, here's the microphone. So feel free to grab it or ask somebody to hand it to you.
Just to start, Yutaka, that's very interesting. So just to make sure I understand, so it said that the element is Japanese and then the target is English. So does it mean that you are generating English-like sounds based on the Japanese elements?
So this is happening in real time. So this is actually my daughter reading the Japanese literature called The Storm of Irritation. She's just reading in Japanese, and then this program forcefully translating that to English, but only phonetics. There's no understanding of the meaning or anything, just phonetically translating to English pronunciation. So that's why you sometimes hear some word in Japanese, sometimes in English, sometimes like a gibberish. There's a sometimes kind of sigh kind of sound is kind of spitted out. So that's how it works and how it's generated.
I was wondering if you empirically test the similarity of this to other language. Maybe we can maybe momentarily what kind of component can be heard as English or Japanese for English speaking people or Japanese speaking people. Oftentimes I felt it's actually French. It sounds like a French because I don't know. I don't speak French, but Malika may have felt completely differently. I don't know.
So I play this to different native speakers, the English, Japanese, one was Korean. So everybody has a different impression. Like Nao just said, like sounds like French. Other people said sounds like Dutch, or sounds like the other language. But this is a kind of that my work is kind of almost like a trigger to kind of provide a space for discussion and discourse. So this is kind of trying to analyze experience, then share the experience. It's just, so my work is not just to work itself, musical piece. It's more about trigger for that type of discourse and analysis, but it's not reduced. But it's kind of more like a phenomenological observation of the experience at the location.
But just a quick thought on that. I mean, I think it's really interesting, and I think the interface between artworks and psychophysical stimuli is also very, very interesting. So I think the space of psychophysical stimuli we tend to focus on is very narrow. Although some of them are quite beautiful and intriguing, but the idea of pushing this in a really creative direction is likely to be very useful, I think, for psychologists and cognitive scientists, because we need we need to expand the field of things we're playing with. But so in that spirit, I was wondering about the question of how we can break down the barrier between external and internally generated speech. So, I mean, one thing that's very confusing, for example, as we all know, is when you hear your own voice echoing. If you're speaking on you can hear yourself. That's really confusing. So then you have a kind of problem that that's sort of me, but then also it's somehow coming from outside. But I wonder if there are any ways in which we can generate signals which seem more likely to be generating internally. Take away the cues that make me think that it's external. At least, I mean, it seems like a really interesting thing, just like blending between English and Japanese. It'd be really interesting to have a stimulus, an auditory signal, which seems partly to be coming from inside your head. You're not quite sure. I mean, I don't know how one does that, but it would be a fascinating thing to be able to do.
That's actually what we're gonna try to do. Like as you said, like when we speak by yourself, it sounds coming from through your bone as well. But when you hear someone speaking, it's always from the external ear. So we try to make even play from the from externally, how to make it sounds like it's coming from inside. So I don't know, maybe we try to find, maybe someone already create some filter to do it, maybe not. So that's something we're gonna try to do. Maybe Yutaka can
Yeah, actually there is a student from Stanford University. They created this kind of resonant filter of our inner structure of the face. So resonance frequency in the nose and the vocal and everything. But they didn't publish the code, only a kind of rough estimate of the filter coefficients. So we try to replicate that and try to so now that the Gemini, the Google AI can produce basically the from the voice from 15-second segment of someone's voice. So if you can use both, then we might be able to create the inner speech really instantly and can try to test it quite quickly in many subjects.
Just one tiny thing on that is that there's also the inverse, which is that if I hear real external voices, but I subtract I impose this filter on them, so it's as if they're coming from within me. I wonder if you can make it feel like somebody else's voice is inside my head. So you have all the resonance as if it's coming from inside my head. So that would be quite a disturbing experience, but interesting perhaps.
And Keisuke already mentioned this video game. I'm not really a gamer. This one was quite interesting because it's not just about the voice itself, but about the situation you're listening into these voices. Because some point in this type of stress situation, the first-person shooter type games, you started losing the ownership of the voice. So you start not noticing whose voice this is. It's just a voice telling me, or me talking to myself, and it's really difficult with more kind of compartmentalized research. So this is kind of, you have to also think about the situation you're listening to the voice. So that's together kind of really changes the perception of the voice. And a quite interesting effect I realized when I played this game.
I see.
The
By the way, Is somebody asking question from external or?
Yeah, I was going to. Yeah, I'm not visible on camera, but it's Olaf here. I have something that is sort of intersecting, prompted by I guess Yutaka's music piece, and then what Keisuke said earlier about the inner speech thing, and I guess it connects also with the attention, consciousness, the change blindness kinds of tests. I wonder about how certain components or channels of perception are compatible or not, right? Some of them could be more easily combinable and made sense of, and some are harder. And for the version of that for speech could be, you know how Vietnamese uses several different things to compose a language, including you know what is prosody in other languages, the tones is used, or in Chinese, right, is used for meaning. But of course, you can also sing in Chinese and Vietnamese and Thai and so on. And yet, yeah, so that works. You can include instruments onto voice and post, and some are less compatible, right? It requires too much, maybe attention switching, and maybe it's not comfortable. There must be between the different modes, as in yes, sensory components. There must be some, maybe a map that we can make of compatibilities and things that are less easy to combine. I was wondering if something had been done in that field, and make that something doable, no? What are your thoughts?
That kind of reminds me of Nao's very neat study on this dual task one. It's kind of related to that. No,
that's right.
The one with some discrimination task with certain with the limited attention, with limited cognitive capacity.
Right. So it's kind of related, but it's not directly. And I can also tell a little bit of the story to what you know, Olaf is probably alluding to. Can you see this?
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of the studies, again, using this natural stimulus, but using a little bit of a change that is ridiculously, you know, incongruent or congruent, right? The guy listening to donut instead of the headphone, or doing the juggling with the, you know, cactus or something like that. And then if you actually show this very briefly, and then see if other people, and in fact, we are actually now currently studying how the children also notices this kind of change, because we suspect that there is some kind of learning and a cultural effect and so on. It turns out that most of the effect comes from the fact that the change is big enough or not. So many people, you know, in the past have, you know, kind of hoped for making a big story about this, you know, contradiction and in contradiction out of the semantic congruence and things like that. But most of the, you know, at least the initial perception of the detection of the change comes from probably the size of the object. And if you remember many of the change blindness things demonstration, then usually it's placed in the periphery and also not super, you know, salient small thing, or if it's small salient thing in the phobia, it changes gradually, or in the background that you are difficult to, you know, fixate or, you know, not paying attention to. So these kind of things are definitely worth revisiting with this type of the naturalistic and also large scale online testing kind of environment. That's one thing. And then also, with respect to what Olaf mentioned, and also, I'm actually also curious about what do you think, Nick, especially after reading your book, is the treatment of the contradiction. So, in many people, including those people who are thinking that the concepts of thinking is always one at a time, contradictory or contradictory feeling, wonder that, you know, Yutaka also mentioned to induce this, you know, by the stimuli, cannot happen, right? Or you suppose that it is just fluctuating really quick to the extent that you can't notice that is not possible to detect by yourself. And I've been always thinking that this is not two alternative that we can resolve using the standard psychophysics. But recently, I started to work with some people, like Nick, maybe you know, Emmanuel Posos, who is working on a quantum cognition. There, this very interesting kind of idea of this using Bell inequality-like tests to see whether is it possible to explain this type of the result, assuming that attention is changing very quickly, or actually two things must be happening at the same time. So I think it would be very interesting and also potentially also critical to understand the future artificial intelligence, because I heard that currently AI cannot handle with this kind of contradictory thoughts. Maybe this is the kind of thing that the audience here may know better, but yeah. What do you think about this general issue of the contradiction?
So I'll just say one thing about that. I mean, I'm very interested in contradictions. And I think that there are sort of two things which we can do. So one is we can jump from one interpretation to another. So for example, with bistable images, or when you have mismatching binocular rivalry, you have different information going on to each eye, and actually then usually one eye dominates. But you don't. It's very hard. It's very hard to the period where you're confused is quite brief. You tend to jump to one interpretation or the other interpretation. But that's the alternating thing you mentioned. But there also is this case, a bit like the music piece that Yutaka showed us. There are cases where you think, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know if is this a duck or a rabbit, or which way is this neck cube pointing, or I can't see I see sort of bits of structure that hasn't resolved into one interpretation or another. So I think of that as not so much as contradiction, but a sort of state of confusion, and that normally the system resolves into one stable pattern or another stable pattern, and sometimes both. But it doesn't. What we don't seem to have, although this is a very difficult, and this is your point about Emmanuel's work is interesting here. Very difficult to quite know how to look at this, but we don't seem to have the two interpretations in our heads at the same time. So we don't look at a duck rabbit and see it both as a duck and a rabbit at the same time. Apparently, now you might say, well, how do we even know that? What does that mean? And maybe there's some clever quantum story which would help us explain what it means for these things to be somehow superposed or operating in parallel, even though we can only report one at a time. The fact that we can only report one at a time doesn't necessarily mean we're not experiencing both. Although I do tend to, I'm sticking with the serial story for now, but I think it's a very, very deep and interesting question.
Yeah, Nitch, why don't you go ahead and jump in?
All right. I'm just a bit confused about this offhand comment about AI having trouble with contradictions. I'm not aware of any such thing. Like, I would almost say it's the other way around. AI just sails past contradictions as if there's no problem at all.
So what I heard is that unlike humans, the way they deal with this contradiction is very, in a sense, very artificial and shallow. Like, if many people just say A, then they agree with A, easily, or if they just decide not to answer, then they not answer in that way. But it's unlike probably me, like I may not say that AI may not say. I don't know whether it may be possible to concoct something like that, but is it possible that the AI say at the same time that I think I understand this, but I don't think that I don't understand this, or I like this, but also I don't like this at the same time?
Yeah. By default, actually, most of the time, the actual thing that's going on in the model, it's giving you a probability distribution over tokens, and the sampling that picks one thing is just done for the display to humans. Well, in a one-off thing, it's only done for the display to humans. when you do that iteratively, then of course you commit to the things you did before. But in practice, what is really being done to generate higher quality text is to do a parallel search over multiple sampling trajectories and do things like beam search. Because if you just do greedy sampling, you tend to get not very good. Well, you tend to get results that more accurately match the distribution of tokens, but from a human point of view, they're kind of incoherent. So instead, you are doing this kind of beam search and finding the completions over, 10, 20, 30 tokens that that kind of don't lead into blind alleys or dead ends, and then you only display to the human one of those, but they all exist inside the AI model. It doesn't care about contradictions at all.
Yeah, all right.
That's actually why people have
yeah.
problems with them, right? Because they don't care about factuality or anything like that. There's no logic or consistency. It's basically free association that just kind of works sometimes.
Maybe you're absolutely right. But I'm not this specialist. But this Oka-san, when I met her at the last time, she was saying that discussion, including this contradictory kind of feeling, within the agent, to let them continue to discuss like today is almost impossible or something like that. But maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, I have to talk to them, I guess.
But just to add a quick point on that, I mean, so it may be, so I'm trying to resolve the contradiction here, which we humans at least like to do. It may be that the point that was being made was that the something like a large language model isn't aware of contradictions, doesn't care at all about them. So it's not, a person would think, hang on, I seem to think two things that don't fit together. This is weird. What do I do about it? Whereas if the large language model will very happily give you completely contradictory information without any concern. And the reason of course it's going to do that is it's hoovering up data from a contradictory corpus. If it's just hoovering up information on the web, people have all kinds of different opinions on the web, and some of them crazy, some of them less crazy. And it's just hoovering that stuff up, and it just gives you different bits of it, and it's no more coherent than the source material. So for humans, one of the things that's very deep about us is that we're trying to find sort of cohesive explanations, and when things don't fit together, whether it's sensory information or textual information, we don't like it, and we do more reflection and processing. Whereas I guess these systems just reflect back whatever stuff they come across, and they don't really have a conception of contradiction at all.
Yeah, I don't want to be an LLM salesman because I think they're really overused for a lot of things that's not appropriate. But there are ways to hook them up to get that sense of contradiction. I mean, that the big result is that when you ask them to review their own output, so you turn the output into an input explicitly with a different framing, then that actually works, and they become much more accurate at math and things like that. So some simple loops. It basically internally the model is all operating in this kind of continuous fluid space where it is holding all of the completions in I don't want to say in mind. All of the completions sort of are the type of object it operates on, right? But then when you sample, you pick something, and so when you feed back those samples in different ways, then you can have things like the bistability going on. In fact, outside of LLMs, you also see it with image generative models like diffusion models. If you look at the actual trajectory over which it generates an image, you can see that there are actually multi-stable things. Like there are attractors that it wants to fall into one or the other, and it'll go about 20% of the way and then kind of pick one. But because that kind of generative process is an iterative sampling process rather than just the sort of feed forward strict processing that is the individual kind of trained model.
Yeah, let's go to Olaf and then Keisuke, and then also I want to hear from Malika on this as well. Do contradictions exist in other models or sensory experiences? So yes.
So my remark is a bit less well. Okay, so I was wondering about comparing contradictions and bringing that back to perception. I guess on the same direction of conflicting kind of channels of perception. Maybe there are some more conflicting than others. And like Nao said, maybe I was wondering, maybe because of the distance, it might be that it's easier to combine. and what is it, combined together as an integrate rather than combined together as an error correct, because it's within the same sphere of this coding coding space. And I was wondering, so it feels like there is some kind of helpful analogy here, or more than that. So on the higher level of the semantic reasoning that Nick was talking about in the beginning, you could have maybe top-down consequences on how you interpret signals in your perceptive system. And on the lower level, this might be present with the example of what I said before, or in music, how frequencies and rhythms are the same thing at the end of the day, but they are just interpreted because of timescales, constraints, and so on. There might be something about things being integrable and things about them being conflicting, and I wonder if it's because of the space and the I guess it connects also with what you just said, Niche, on multi-stable states. I think humans do exactly the same kind of mistakes to some extent as those LLMs do in terms of reasoning mistakes. And I think now you showed some pictures of that being possible, right? And we tend to error correct something that is close, but if it's far enough, then we find a way to integrate it because we're trying to make sense at the end of the day of this puzzle of the world functioning around us. So isn't that the same thing? This conflicting channels and contradictions.
Keisuke, what are your thoughts?
To respond to Olaf, I also have some question, like clarification to Nao. It's kind of related to Olaf's point, but like I wonder, when you say like a contradicted, like I can think of like a contradicted thought, but when it's into like a perceptual phenomenology, I cannot come up with the actual situation. We actually have two different perceptions together. So I think now the study I just mentioned is more like you can see shape and color at the same time, but we cannot see blue and red at the same time to the one same object. And I don't see like a binocular library. We see two things, but to me it's kind of dynamical alteration, not seeing same stuff same time. So I just wonder what is actual example of we have one like superimposed perceptual phenomenology to get not just alteration. I just don't see especially when we comes into this perceptual experience, it's really difficult to find the example to me. And also, I think that we also discussed this kind of stuff with like a predictive coding or Bayesian inference view of perception. And sometimes we discuss because we use like a monotonic distribution to model perception. That's why we cannot choose. We don't really use multimodal. Always use the Gaussian. So maybe that's why we cannot have two stuff together. But I don't know. That's a kind of maybe different view. Like maybe brain always use one single model. That's always people in predictive coding say like always switching to model. That's why we only see one thing. But I don't know. Yeah, is it something addressing your stuff, or?
Probably yes. It seems like I need to think about it. Feel free to ignore my question. It's just
sorry. I just think about my question.
But I also think that the question of bistable perception depends on the sensory modalities, and it really depends on whether you have a simultaneous apprehension of the set of stimuli or a sequential one. So, for example, it exists in auditory perception, but some people say that it relies on different mechanisms. And I know some colleagues, especially Barry Smith in London, tried and did it in flavor perception. And it was far more difficult to obtain. And also given that flavor relies on several perceptual systems, touch with the tongue, flavor, smell, and so on. You can also pay attention to subpart of each sensory modality. So you can pay attention to the smell component versus the trigeminal component. So I think that it's there's a sort of visual bias on this consideration, because we always take the model of vision, which is a simultaneous process and which is not the most usual in the sensory systems. So that's my thought.
Very nice, Malika. This is very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, because if it's sequential, then it doesn't work the same. You cannot switch that easily. We go back to the temporally extended form of perceptual process.
Yeah.
This attention and its effect on the experience qualia or memory encoding towards the end, depending on it probably depends heavily on the different kind of modalities. We have several reviews and conducted, but it seems like a somatosensory modality and also auditory modality seem to be more serial than visual. There is a little weaker evidence for the parallel kind of experience. And it is also consistent with neurobiological signature as a structure of the visual system and also auditory system and so on, right? Like the amount of the cortex devoted for the visual processing is much, much bigger than in general compared to other sensory modalities. And if you eventually believe that experience arises from the cortical processing, then this vast parallel processing of vision, if it's selected by some kind of spotlight of attention like mechanism, and only that component gives rise to consciousness at each moment, it may work like that, but the reality is that brain actually is massively parallel all the same time. And the attention system itself also has multiple kind of sources and the target, and also it's not like really precisely putting one thing at a time. So from that perspective, I also think in the case of the vision, it's hard to maintain probably the claim that when you are seeing the face, you are only seeing eye at this moment, but not the other rest of the face. I think as a whole, like this is related to Olaf's kind of comment. Something that is related and close together is integrated and also experienced at the same time. Like face, eyebrow without anything else is very difficult to experience. But something completely different, like artificial text and also face, that may be easier to distinguish, and also you can pay attention one or in expense of the other. That's potentially possible, but something that is so tightly to experience together is also difficult to distinguish. That's one thing I would say. And if I can say one more thing, is it all right?
Of course. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So one thing I really like about that the idea of this quantum cognition is this framework. And that's also related to some of the stuff that we discussed right now. Many of the time, when we talk about sort of that contradiction or fluctuation of mind, it's on the left side of the thing. It's a classical kind of a view where one particle moves up and down. And then if it's too fast, you feel like you are both up and down at the same time, or over like 4.4 milliseconds or 4 seconds. But in this, quantum framework of the cognition or experience, each moment is actually having some kind of duration or width at each moment. And this is the right side of this kind of framework. And here, in response to Keisuke's question, maybe something like this happens in perception. But normally we rely on the reports, so it's either collapsed into yes or no. But some kind of, for example, random dot motion experiment, if you are a subject in one time, you might have felt, but you definitely have a sensation that you are seeing something to the left and the right at the same time. And with a distributed kind of, confidence or clarity at the same time. But this is a very kind of, very much needs to be investigated in the future research, and also dissociating decision or categorization from experience perceived, which is very difficult.
That's true.
But we can do, I think.
Yeah, I think this is like something that one thing that has been really bothering me a lot. And actually, I want to ask, especially Malika and Yutaka, and of course everybody else. But one thing that I'm really worried about is that I will never know what it's like to be a bat. That's so sad, because I'm human, and at the end of the day, if I want to have all these different perceptions and try to be able to understand things, I'm really just limited to the way that my own brain works. And even if I were to really like put a camera into like maybe like 100B eyes or something like that and see the world like that, I'm still mapping that experience onto my own experience with 2 eyes. So so Malika and Yutaka, is it possible to, I guess, expand the way that humans have our senses? I mean, because like we're limited to the senses that we have, but I mean, is it possible to, I mean, have a sense that is beyond just that? Like, I'm like, as a simple example, maybe like, is it possible for us to actually see in UV, not just to like see through a UV lens where it's mapping UV wavelengths onto something that we can see, but actually experiencing those UV, or maybe like instead of being seeing just RGB to, what is it, like trichromat color, things like that? Is that possible to experience with technology that's not simply mapping to our limited senses?
Plenty of things to say, so it's gonna be tough to choose. Of course, I'm gonna say that you can translate any information you want. So I can give you a sense of ultraviolet, for example, and you can understand the information. So it's the first point. Second, then to be able to feel it, it's more complex, and especially if you think of how it relates to emotions, for example, then we have to take into account a developmental trajectory. So let's, if you speak of colors, for the blind persons with this system, it's really tricky, but in fact, it's normal. They say, okay, now if you, for example, and it's the most often used, you use timber to map a color, then the blind persons will say, okay, I'm able to know that this is blue, that this is green, but this is meaningless to me because there's no emotions associated to that. So then you have to think of, and it was my third point earlier, you have to use this system to integrate the novel information into your world, into your cognitive structures. You understand what I mean? So it's the third point. You're able to understand things, to perceive things, but then you have to make sense of these things in your cognitive system, in your cognitive architecture. But things are possible, and so that's the first point. The second one, I think it's 2 different questions. You'll never know what it really feels like to be a bird, to be quadrichromat, but I'm never going to feel how it's like to be you either. So the main question is, with our perceptual system, within our own envelope, what are the constraints that this puts on the type of information we can transmit and the type of cognitive architecture we have? So it's 2 different things. I don't have to be you, or I don't have to be a bird to communicate with you, but I have to understand within which intersection we can communicate. What can you understand, or what a bird can understand, and vice versa. So I think it's two different questions: the content of the message that we can understand or not, and what it feels like to be in this world. I don't know if it helps. And I have plenty of other thoughts, but
Yeah, and Yutaka, what are your thoughts? Because I know you've explored this with various art projects as well. So I'm curious to see what you think. But you're on mute.
I keep muting myself, sorry. So Malika just mentioned about, I think, the device called Voice, which can translate the vision to audition, which I tried also. Because I'm not a super user, which actually can embed that into my cognitive system. So I never had that kind of same type of quality, so to speak, to that I'm seeing something. I'm just hearing the scenery translated into the sound, and which actually blocks my audition simultaneously. So it doesn't really work for me. But so as been mentioning that the Malika is more like working on like sensory substitutions and expansion of the what we have, and I'm doing the opposite. My work is usually suspend my perception, so reduce our perception in order to try to kind of understand how we be working as ourselves as human. So my work is usually placing the audience into the situation where you have less of ability to perceive our environment. So that's how we work with this kind of issue without trying to understand us, our cognitive process or a perception in the duration of my work. So that's my kind of opposite, but actually the interest is kind of same. So also I'm now working on what's called phytoacoustics, which is like plant acoustics, how the plant communicated with the insect in the ultrasonic range. So I'm making composition out of that type of communication, try to decouple and couple with other type of ecosystem. So this is a kind of, I also interested in that region, but I'm doing the other things at the same time. Yeah, so that's my kind of.
Can I have another thought?
Oh, no, go ahead, please.
Sorry, because it's extremely interesting because it makes me think that there's another point. It's also, we have to think about how it is transmitted, which relates to the common sensible across sensory modalities. So for example, if you speak about the voice, you take an arbitrary code between subdimensions in vision and subdimensions in audition, for example, which is arbitrary. But then you have also a question of, sometimes you can use the same common sensible. So for example, right now we are doing something that I think is very interesting, but we translate social touch in sound. So people are really able to recognize through sound that this is a caress, this is a tapping, and so on. And we just record with very specific contact sensor and so on the touch, and we replay it. And this time it's exactly the same code because it's vibration. So we build on the fact that touch and audition, friction and audition is made out of vibration. So it's also another question, which is how you can communicate perceptual messages, information, and so on, and in which medium it is more natural, or you can grasp more of it. And with this, when you use the same subcomponent here, vibrations, it's pretty immediate. You understand the content because you do not have to translate it into through an arbitrary code. So it's also a sub question of, I think, the big question raised here.
First, I just wanted to say I had no idea that plants communicated to insects with, did you say ultrasonic sound?
Oh yeah, just came out 2023 from Tel Aviv University. They published it's called like a new genre of acoustics. It's called phytoacoustics, but this actually came from plant neurobiology from 1920s, from this scientist in India. He established this kind of plant neurobiology from 1920s already. Then it's kind of phytoacoustic is a kind of extension of that academic genre. But 2 years ago, the researchers from Tel Aviv University found that there's ultrasonic acoustic transmission from plants for the pollination. So it's kind of communicating with bees in order to make the pollination to happen. If I read correctly, that's my understanding of the paper that was published in Nature in 2023, I think. So based on that, I'm starting to research on the kind of composition system using that type of ecosystem of like the ultrasonic communication.
Wow, my mind was just blown. Okay, Olaf.
So my mind again went to something else, but it's well, I mean it's still very connected to all of this. I'm wondering what do you think, guys? What's the end game of this research? So let's say we solve communication of perception, right? It's solved. This came from a conversation with Paul and Martin last night. So we have it. We have this perfect mapping, whatever you want to call that. We have this function that universally translates from one mind to another mind, phenomenological experiences, multi-channel. We have the picture. We know how they integrate, how they split. We worked out the math. If there is math to be done, so we've done it. What are the constraints that are left? So working back from that step, we have it. What is still impossible from here? And my question here is there I was going to say a sort of Turing completeness of perception? Is there a threshold from which you will be able to communicate all percepts with the other? And yeah, we have that's, the Turing completeness is not the right picture, but maybe you got what I mean. So maybe there is a threshold from which you can communicate all that is communicatable from your private, supposedly private information is not private anymore. Sorry, it's obviously a very easy question. I realize.
I'm not going to successfully answer that question, but I just thought I'd add that an example of this would be: could you feel somebody else's pain? So literally, if that would be a very, I mean, they're still a person, but it could also then obviously the same question would arise for every other creature. I think pains are particularly important and nice examples because we have it sometimes one has a tendency to want to dissolve the hard problem of consciousness by saying, well, it doesn't really matter. It's all a matter of sort of the relation between the experience and the external world. And as long as we've got that right, the actual the qualia itself is kind of a null question. But with pains, the experience of the pain seems to be really a really live issue, whereas I think the experience of blue is less crucial. So it's very, I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but it seems like a really difficult but very interesting question. Could you experience the pain of another creature or being as your own? I just don't know. I don't know. And how would we know we got it right? That's another tricky question, isn't it? I mean, it may be possible, but it's not obvious. So if we set the machine up, we say that's working perfectly. You can give me your experiences, and I have an experience, but is it like your experience? We've got to somehow test that. Maybe there are ways to do that, but it's not trivial.
That's exactly right. I think, yeah, and in my question, just to clarify, I did mean pain included, hunger included, all those other private things. And maybe there's a classification, like there is a, something like a Chomskyan ladder of percepts, right, that are expressible or not.
Maybe I
transmittable.
Yeah, I also tried to also address some of the question or point raised by Malika as well, and also Alicia about Bab's experience. If we start, so since we started focusing on the structural property of this experience, the structural approach to the consciousness, what I realized was that the many things that are assumed as a sort of the kind of logical foundation of the sameness starts to collapse And when I learned category theory, one of the first things that was struck to me was that there are many different levels of sameness. And usually when we talk about same, as Olaf said, or maybe Malika said, when two things are same, implicitly what we expect is that number of the elements are the same, like A, B, C, D, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and then their relationship is exactly the same. 1 and B is the same as A to B. And then this type of the same element, same relationship is roughly called, isomorphism. And we usually have only that kind of language. And that's even not true within ourselves, right? Like if you think about, you yourself as a child, or now or tomorrow, learning new things, you are already different. But still, you can realize that this is actually the same, and you do experience this is the same. So we need to go beyond this complete mapping, or whatever you said, Olaf, of this perfect mapping kind of idea, to remove this kind of a very rigid and unrealistic kind of assumption of the isomorphism into something much weaker. And what I find super interesting in category theory is so-called adjunction. And the adjunction is something like, when I say, this also fits with the theme of this language. When I have this idea, and then I throw it to you, and then you interpret it, and then you return to me, oh, you mean this. And then usually it's different, right, from what I initially said, because of the words interrelation to other words, or returned word is different. So for example, when I say qualia, many people return to me, it's like what it is like, or it's like a feeling, or it's a phenomenal consciousness. Then because I see all of them as the same, this kind of communication is called equivalence. Going further one to the other and then coming back, it's the same thing. But if you return to me, qualia is like access consciousness, or it's like an attention, or it's like a concept, I can kind of accept that, but it's different, definitely different from me. And this is a kind of communication that's happening all the time, and that's the sort of the useful kind of sameness of the adjunction, I think. And then once we understand this, structure kind of sameness and so on, bats and humans are definitely different, but in some way maybe we can share some parts of the experience, like spatialness or soundness or something like that. And I think that we can kind of think about it. And then utilizing this kind of technology, I think Alicia, maybe you said that color blindness people's experience, empirically, when we did this analysis of this, colorblind people's experience and color typical people's experience, we found that our red is probably likely to be the case, similar to their red, but our green is likely to be different from their green. There may be some kind of asymmetry between the color, probably, but this is still not published. So we'll publish it hopefully this year, and then try to open up this structural kind of perspective of the sameness to be more widespread. I think that's the key to move ahead. Anyway, it was a long comment. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So to complete that, it feels like there is something different between mapping experiences and communicating about experiences. I think, Nick, you said that, or someone else, I think I heard too. Communicating is this, you could map perfectly. In the easiest case, we also discussed that yesterday. I don't know, let's say there is a very simple organism A and very simple organism B, and let's say they have experiences, right? But they feel things on only one dimension. It might be something very different, but you could map this axis A's axis of whatever sensing temperature to be sensing colors, so something like that, project onto one dimension, right? and you can communicate about that. But they would communicate about their own world, and it would break down only when there is a conflict in the dialogue that now you're mentioning, right? And there are some situations where maybe those two things are the same, because of the environment just allowing you to confuse them. But at the end of the day, that's the communication, and is feeling the same is I don't know, that's the harder problem. Maybe we should, maybe there are more levels like that.
Maybe. Sorry, I have to leave soon. So just to let you know.
Yeah,
Should
we're
I just leave?
soon at time.
Just pressing the close, or?
Yes. So actually, I wanted to let Nitch have a chance to share one last thought, and then we will conclude. Does that sound good to everybody? All right, let's do that.
So
All right.
if I hang up, that's fine?
Yes, that is okay.
Yeah, all right. See you.
Yeah, if you have to head up now, then that's totally fine. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nao.
Yeah, I guess I was going to do this as a question, but if we're ending, I should do it as a comment. That the thing about pain in particular, it makes me think that for this kind of fantasy translation, you would probably not be able to do it without actually having to change yourself as part of whatever that device would be. So I think that there are a lot of things, like even without going into really extreme examples, we can't experience without changing to meet the experiences, but we also have the ability to change to meet experiences. And if you wanted to actually make something that would let you feel something else's pain, you would also need to have the same, or at least to have correspondences in the sort of consequence of that pain, what that pain means about what it can do, what it needs to do, what sort of actions are going to be frustrated, what sort of motor things are going to be interrupted by lower instincts. And if that, correspond to a body part you don't have, then in order to really get it, it's going to have to map to something that now you're not just receiving passively, but that you're also trying to act through. Because you can't feel the interruption of an action without trying to act and finding it to be interrupted. So I wonder, when you take that into account, that maybe this ideal of perfect translation actually forcibly changes the listener to achieve it. Does that I guess change any of these other sorts of things we're holding that we're talking about?
Yeah, super interesting food for thought, and I think that's a great question to end on for today. Thank you all so much for joining us. Let's give a round of applause to the panelists, and especially to everybody who is watching on YouTube and everybody who is also in the call online joining us as well. Thank you all so much. So we will continue the discussion tomorrow with session 4, and we're going to be talking about agents and goal-directedness. Now, because today we talked a lot about sensing and perception, which has a lot to do with agents that we kind of know are, seem a little obvious to us, like a bee or a person or, another object or like a LLM or something like that. But I mean, what about other things? Like, is this an agent? Probably not. But I mean, maybe there's other agents that are just non-obvious. So tomorrow we're going to dive right into that, and it's going to be really exciting. So check us out at 12 p.m. Japan time. So check out your time zone and don't miss that conversation. It's going to be lots of fun. All right. So with that, thank you all so much for coming, and we will catch you tomorrow. Bye.